Welcome to In the Zone number 72, and my next guest with me is a local guy that's been around for forever, I'll say. Welcome, Charlie Croneworth.
Very good. Thank you for having me.
So Charlie, my typical scenario here is we talk about born and raised and all this other stuff, and as we talked before the camera went live, you've pretty much from a mental standpoint have had to endure your life as young Charlie, little Charlie, Charlie Jr. Now it's Jake's dad.
That is correct.
So I applaud you for having to deal with that your entire life.
Not a problem.
So you were born and raised locally in St. Clair. Let's give us the history.
Absolutely. I was born here in St. Clair in the old St. Clair Hospital downtown.
Yep.
Then the building that became City Hall for a while.
Yep.
Dr. Beer, whose home I live in currently, is the physician that brought me into the world along with my siblings. So yeah, it's been 1958,
okay,
to be exact.
That's something we've got in common because Dr. Beer was my doctor, and I was born in the same small hospital. So
very good. Yeah.
So born and raised in St. Clair, and went to what school growing up?
So went through the public school system. My sisters had the luxury of going through the parochial schools,
okay,
essentially St. Mary's. I went through Eddy Elementary, then the old middle school there next to St. Mary's,
yep,
and then St. Clair High School.
Okay.
So.
What year? What graduation?
1977.
Okay.
So a few years ago.
Yeah, a few years ago. Yeah. And as we talked earlier too, your father was in business for a long career, and I talk about St. Clair, and it's fondly in say the 60s and the 70s. There was two big employers in town. Your dad ran one of them and
Correct.
worked for Diamond Crystal.
Yes, he did. My parents moved here in the late 40s. They were living in Detroit. My father at the time was employed by Chrysler. Somehow, some way, they made their way up to St. Clair and said, gee, it's a nice little town. So my dad submitted a resume to Diamond Crystal and was hired as a designer on a drafting board. And 39 years later, he retired as president of the company. So he worked his way up through the ranks. And
so now as a drafting guy in a salt company, was that designing packaging or?
No, it's designing, equipment installations,
Okay.
Call it new assets, if you will, building expansions,
Okay.
those types of things, renovations. And so he had graduated from Michigan Tech in 1943 and was deployed into the Marine Corps as a ROTC officer. Spent some time in Okinawa, unfortunately, and came back. Had met my mother just before he went overseas. They wrote for a number of years, back and forth. Returned to the Detroit area where his parents were residing, and a couple months later they got married. And 63 years later, unfortunately, he passed away in 2009 after a wonderful marriage to my mother. And certainly she's passed since 2018, but so St. Clair has been our home for many years.
Yeah. So growing up, did you go down to the salt factory with him at times?
Oh yes, Saturdays when I was call it grade school age, would go down on Saturdays with him. At the time, he was a plant manager at the facility here in St. Clair, and he would do his paperwork, and I would draw on the chalkboard and horse around, do things, and then we'd go to the shrimp boat, if you remember that restaurant, maybe not, in the old St. Clair. Go to the shrimp boat and have a hamburger and
Okay.
come home, spend the afternoon at the house. So,
Enlighten me where the shrimp boat was.
so right straight across the street from the current BP gas station.
Okay. Yep.
So it was on the water side, and there was some form of a marina or gas dock down on the water. Don't recall 100%
Right.
accuracy here what exactly was there, but it was a little diner with a couple tables and a luncheon counter.
Back in the days when like you say, you went down to work with Dad, and you maybe came back, and then you probably rode your bicycle downtown. And
Oh sure, yeah, all
all
those
that
things.
so you siblings. Tell me about your siblings.
So I have three older sisters. Sister who's retired as a school teacher. She lives in Detroit. My sister Carol. My sister Linda also lives in the Detroit area. She lives in Grosse Pointe.
Mm-hmm.
And her daughters, one of her daughters lives in Grosse Pointe. My oldest sister, Carol, did not have children. Then my sister, Mary, lives in West Bloomfield. She's the youngest of the three. And she has a daughter who lives out in the state of Washington.
Okay.
And she is, unfortunately, she's widowed as well for a number of years now. So, yeah, so we're somewhat close by to each other. We try to get together a few times a month and have dinner and stay in touch. So
I met your sister by way of my business of calling on all kinds of people with the copier needs.
Oh,
I
yes.
sold her and her husband several copiers over the years. So
absolutely,
they were
yeah.
residential
My sister
builders.
Mary, yeah, they were builders. That's correct. Yep.
So and then you've got your two children. Am I correct with two?
Yes, two boys.
Yep.
My son Charlie lives here in St. Clair. He actually lives in my parents' old home in Meldrum Circle.
Okay.
He recently married in February to a nice young lady from Marysville. So he is a territory manager for Snap-on Tools.
Okay.
He's a corporate employee, and she is a nurse working in Marysville for Dr. Nedick. So he's 30, I gotta get this right, 33 now.
Right.
And then my youngest son, Jacob, he's 29. He's living in San Diego during the season and Chicago in the off season. So.
Okay. We talked a little bit about that. He's like, you probably can't go for lunch in town anyway and have not somebody approach you or talk baseball.
Absolutely. I mean, it's fine. I'm accustomed to it now, and it's always a sincere line of questioning. How's he doing, and those types of things. So yeah, it's good. It's certainly I'm very proud of both boys, Charlie and his career and his success, and certainly Jacob with his major league career playing for the Padres. Both boys work hard. They're very focused, very driven. Somewhat opposite personalities, but certainly they're fine young men, and I'm very proud of them.
Sure, very good. The one thing we talked about too is that not that I know, but the glimpse of what you see as a beautiful lifestyle of playing Major League Baseball, I would say from the outside looking in, it's not quite what it appears when you look at a schedule. It's 162 games and then playoffs possibly, which means you're on the road.
It's
crazy.
Yeah, I think the glamour piece is what you see on TV, and all of the time before and after games. I think we talked before this. He gets to the field about 1 o'clock and goes through his routine, and certainly infield and batting practice, and then have a light meal, and then it's game time, and then after the game there's some review periods there, and he gets home between midnight and 1 in the morning if he's in San Diego.
Right.
So it's second shift, and it's long hours, and get some sleep and go back at it the next day. But they play every day. I mean, they get 1 day off every 21 days by contract.
Okay.
But of course he gets other planned days off, get some rest. But yeah, he's played the last 4 years. He's played the 9th most games of everybody in Major League Baseball. So he's playing a lot of games, and it's very grueling schedule for him.
Well, it's like we talked earlier. The glamorous side looks cool, but like the interesting thing that I got from you is when you said second shift, and I never thought about that. But when you think about coming home from work at 1 in the morning, you're probably still on a natural high or adrenaline, so you probably don't go to sleep till 2 or 3.
That's accurate.
Right?
That is accurate.
So then you try to have some sense of normalcy about getting up during the next morning. I don't know, maybe they sleep till 9, 10 o'clock because they need to, right?
Yeah, he typically gets up early, has a light breakfast, and then he goes back to bed and sleeps for a while, and then gets up again. So it's like in 2 pieces. But yeah, I mean, and of course, living out of a suitcase for half those games, traveling wherever, and they're coming to the east, so it's
time zones.
Somewhat beneficial because it's early for them, right? But yeah, it's not fun. The game gets over, and it's a Sunday night, and they're going on a road trip. Monday's a day off, scheduled day off for the team, and they fly out Sunday night, and they spend Monday sleeping because
Right.
they're in another time zone and trying to stay in their routine. So
And then you've got the whole issue of training and meals and watching what you eat. And
nutrition is a major issue with him. Certainly very focused on that, and just maintain a routine. And the off-season schedule is really no downtime.
Right.
As I mentioned, he takes a couple weeks off and essentially sleeps, and then he's back at it for the rest of the off-season in Chicago.
thing I always laugh at is when you go to a ball game and you hear these goofballs in the stands yelling stuff to a player because maybe he struck out twice or something, and you go, wait a minute, let's put any human in front of this pitcher that throws, and the ball does this, and it does this, and it does this.
Oh yeah, it's not an easy assignment, and certainly the intensity of performing. And, your performance report is not once a year. Your evaluation, it's daily. Everybody gets to go and read it on the internet. And, and so he's pretty level-headed about that. The highs and lows really don't exist with him. He just tunes it out, and baseball amnesia if it's a tough day, and certainly control the highs if it's been a good day. So
there's probably a lot of psychology involved in that, right?
Mental toughness, absolutely. Absolutely.
The thing I always think of when you think of baseball is a simple fact that the game's best generally don't hit the ball more than 3 out of 10 times for success, right?
300 hitters, a wealthy individual.
Right.
That's correct.
So very interesting.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about you. You then graduated from St. Clair High School.
I did. Went to Michigan Tech.
Okay.
Graduated with an engineering degree in 1981. Met my wife at Michigan Tech on a blind date.
Okay.
And certainly she was a year behind me, so I graduated, started working in Ohio, in the small town of Marion, Ohio. She then graduated in 1982. We were married in June of '82, and she was also engineering graduate, worked in the heating, ventilation, air conditioning, consulting engineering field for a number of years in Columbus. We then moved back to St. Clair, or I'm sorry, I skipped a beat here. We went to Akron, Ohio, after a couple of years in Marion. Went to Diamond Crystal Salt, the Akron facility. So I was a shift supervisor. Worked third shift, worked second shift, worked first shift. Enjoyed it very much. She actually was working for Kent State at the time as a facilities engineer. So my father retired in '86, and he had a vision. Let's buy a business, start a business, own a business, and work together, which I feel was a true blessing to spend time working with your father. So. Business opened in the spring of '86, Mohawk Plastics on DeGursey down in Marine City. So we were in business there for 10 years, sold the business in 1996 to Dana Corporation, our largest customer. And at the time, my wife was struggling with some health issues. The boys were born in '89 and '94, so we had 2 young boys. Unfortunately, the health issues worsened, and she passed away in August of 1998 at the age of 38, unfortunately. So 2 young boys. Was working for Dana, and decided that it was best to take some time off, obviously, to support the boys who were, again, 4 and 8. My parents were, and my sisters were obviously very involved, very engaged in helping raise them at a difficult time. As well as neighbors. We worked through it. The boys were at St. Mary's. The teachers at St. Mary's treated them like they were their children, which was, again, a blessing. So moving forward, I ended up working for Blue Water Plastics for a few years as a VP of operations, and then Blue Water Plastics was sold to Sarna and subsequently closed. Then transitioned over to working for Beaver Lumber for a short time. Their composite lumber facility is over in St. Joe, Benton Harbor. Give me my resume here. So then for about 9 years I worked in Marysville for, at the time it was called Fagerdala. They were a foam, F-O-A-M, foam extrusion producer primarily for the bedding industry. That business was sold. There's kind of a theme here. Yeah. Business was sold and ended up going to work for what was at the time TI Automotive, global supplier, brake lines, fuel tanks, fuel rails, call it the powertrain side of the business. So since the 1st of 2012, I've been there, so it's 11 and a half years now. And today I'm responsible for the operations in North America as a managing director. So we have 19 facilities in the 3 countries, US, Canada, Mexico, somewhere north of 7,000 employees. Heavily involved, obviously, in all aspects, or I should say all OEM supply.
Sure.
So very intense, going through COVID, going through now potential strike, chip shortages. Last few years have been a little challenging. Yeah. But certainly it's the new norm. So we deal with it every day.
So let's step back and talk about Mohawk Plastics. Mm-hmm. When you bought the company, did you produce the same products throughout the tenure, or did you change the type of product?
Well, that's a good question. It was actually a zero-base startup, so no equipment, no employees, empty building there on Degursey. Yep. As we launched into the supply of plastic parts, let's call it, injection molded parts, we were a subcontractor. Our initial first customer was Pine River Plastics, Tom Acton. Yep. They were a big customer for us, and certainly we started out with a handful of machines and a handful of employees, and then we became a subcontractor to Huron Plastics and a little bit to Blue Water Plastics, and then we slowly grew our customer base. So it started out with the Pine River element, primarily non-automotive, and certainly Huron was all automotive at the time. So when we transitioned into different products, we were in the medical supply business for a while. We made pregnancy test kits, if you can believe that, like 100,000 a month. So that was a big market for us. But ultimately, with the industry in the area being automotive, it's pretty hard to not get engaged in it. And certainly the volumes and the demands were there, much different than non-automotive. So we ended up getting in the gasket business, the reusable gasket business, and that's how we became engaged with Dana by way of a company by the name of Plumley Companies. They're down in Tennessee. Interesting story, the founder of Plumley and my father were good business friends, and through the National Association of Manufacturers. So he had 4 boys, and so the 2 dads got the 4 boys and the 1 boy together, and we formed call it a technical relationship. They were the gasket side of the business, and we were the plastic, call it picture frame side of the business. So we made gaskets for every ceiling surface, from oil pans to valve covers to water pumps, and big business. So it came to a point where Dana said, geez, I think we ought to own these 2 companies for all the right reasons. They were in the hard gasket, head gasket business, steel or multi-layer steel. So it added to their portfolio, give them control, and certainly it all worked out for the best. Business was sold in '96. They bought Plumley Companies and Mohawk at the same time, late '96. So there was a short period there before Ann's passing where I was a Dana employee. Good company to work for, very well run.
Now, as you sold Mohawk Plastics and you look back on it, I'm guessing that business goes through ups and downs with technology and with profitability and the ups and downs of the auto industry. Looking back at it, was it a good time to sell?
I would say it was okay time to sell. The early '90s were a tough period in automotive. Mid '80s were certainly a tough period that preceded our entry. Early '90s were pretty soft. Things were ramping up in the mid '90s. But you always remember the good things about the business, and certainly all three of my sisters worked in the business.
Okay.
I have to mention that so I don't get in trouble with the family.
Yeah.
My mother worked in the business, so we all had different roles, certainly, and yeah, it was a fun environment. Certainly, working with my father and for my father, and the learning experience was invaluable. It's not something you can get in a textbook, right? So, yeah, it was. As I said, you remember the good things.
Yep.
You know, the fun and hiring employees and seeing young individuals grow and mature and get married and have families, and some of those same individuals work for me today at TI. But you don't remember geez, we're having trouble hiring employees, and are we paying enough, and are benefits good enough, and customers aren't paying us, and cash flow, and those conveniently have been forgotten, those environments. So I think there's more positive memories than negative.
Right. And running a business like that, a lot of people that have not been experienced doing something like that, they don't realize I'll call it the bootstrapping or the cash flow requirements. It doesn't just magically go away one day.
No.
Because you're growing and you're adding new technology and you're adding new presses, and that is an ongoing thing.
It is.
That weighs on the human mind.
Absolutely. Yeah. The goal was to get out of bank covenants.
Right.
And you look at the bank covenants. It's your firstborn child. They want your house. They want your cars. Certainly, getting out of bank covenants was always a goal, and we accomplished that. But it wasn't without a lot of stress.
Right. Because you're forever chasing that next growth period
Absolutely.
or product that you have to buy. And I'm guessing that when you bought a press, it wasn't a $50,000 acquisition. It was a maybe $500,000 acquisition.
Absolutely.
So.
Well, and we added a second facility there on DeGursey. We built a new building, and that was stressful on the financial side of the business and making sure it was up and running and profitable. So yeah, we were always in a growth mode, it seemed, and while it was fun, it was pretty intense.
Yeah, and then you look at the years, say 10 years later, when now there is no Blue Water Plastics, there is no Pine River Plastics.
Correct.
And I'll ask you, but I'm guessing that foreign companies coming from offshore, competing with China, competing with Mexico, was that the downfall of a lot of it? No,
well, I would say some of that, and certainly the family influence.
Sure.
If you look at the Haas family in Blue Water, I mean, they were incredible people to work for. I mean, just totally focused on the employees and the loyalty to the family, many, many high seniority people.
Sure.
And of course, when they sold, in the early 2000s. Carl stayed around for a short time. John stayed around for a short time as Haas family members. And then, of course, there was nephews working in the business. Things changed. The new owner, Sarna, brought in their people.
Right.
And maybe not with the same level of concern or passion for the workforce. And certainly things didn't go well, and they closed it down. They essentially liquidated it. Of course, Ernie Oskin with Huron Plastics, and then that transitioned into Art Goodsell and a team of people that purchased that from that business and some portion from Ernie, and then they sold, and that went through several different owners after that. And those facilities are still operating, not all under one umbrella.
Right.
And then Pine River, of course, with Tom, unfortunately, with his health and a few other things. So yeah, I would say there's some offshore influence, but certainly the owner and the vision of the ownership
went away when
when the sale occurred in those cases. So yeah, it makes it tough. I know when we sold, the business remained in Marine City for a while, but then they picked it up and moved it down to Tennessee.
Right.
So those people certainly that were loyal to the Croneworth family were loyal to Dana, but certainly, the jobs went down to Tennessee.
And moving 700 miles.
not everyone wants to live in Tennessee. So absolutely.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's a piece of that, and there's other companies down. You think of St. Clair Plastics, and You think of Seaway Plastics with Joe Kinsfater,
Yep.
and certainly Butler Plastics, and you go down the list, and certainly, with changing times and changing ownership, things happen.
The interesting thing, in a conversely situation, I look at Diamond Crystal, and Diamond Crystal, luckily, has basically stood the test of time with big corporation taking over. And now when you look at that facility from the water view with a big addition going on, and I have no idea how big, but when I look at that, I say, that bodes well for the city, for the jobs.
It does. I'm not sure, probably should know this, but I don't, what the total head count is there now. Sure. Obviously, when the corporate office was there, it seemed everybody in the corporate office was involved in Rotary or the Lions Club or some activity in St. Clair, the school system, and with that disappearing, changed the dynamics a bit. Yeah. But there's still a lot of St. Clair people working in the plant, and certainly the Cargill influence, bring in people from the outside as part of the routine. But I look at what the Bewer family has done, and certainly Dick, and now with Tim Bewer, who I have a great deal of respect for. Tim's a visionary as it relates to the lumber industry and what he's done with that business, and certainly building their headquarters there and showcase that is, and their level of employment. They've hopefully, I would like to think, displaced what disappeared with Diamond Crystal, and what Tim's built there and continues to build is very impressive, and utmost respect for Tim again. He's done a great job and certainly has a great staff of people there. So
it's good to see in small towns that those employers still are around, doing what they do, because they're sort of you go, and you as well as anybody would know, when you go to some of these towns that you see that manufacturing facilities are now boarded up and fenced off, and
absolutely.
Then there's no jobs, and then there's decay, and the community tends to fall apart.
It is a concern.
Yeah.
And of course now we've got this Magna facility in town, and I know some of the employees, but I have no connection with them. We're not a supplier to them.
Right.
Different element of automotive, being in the EV side of it. We're in the EV business, but not that piece of it. And of course there's facilities out in the park, the Haas Park, that some are doing okay and some are struggling.
Right.
The CPC, they took over some of the Blue Water buildings, and not sure their stability or what their long-term viability is here in town, but certainly with changing times and certainly the market, it's a tough environment to be an automotive supplier. The financial demands, very, very, even for a company our size, we do $4 billion. Demands on the smaller, call it family-owned businesses, they're strapped right now, very strapped. I'm pretty close to the supply side with a couple organizations that I'm a member of, where we share, some non-critical or non-sensitive information. But I would suggest that probably a third of the automotive supply base is in the high-risk category.
Yeah, I've read articles where the question of this UAW issue coming up is not a good mix for some of these companies.
It's really not. I would tell you that if there's an extended strike, the big fear right now is, they go on strike, and depending what your mix is with the big three and other German and Japanese OEMs, some of these companies won't survive.
And if they don't,
a couple of weeks, or if they don't, then you're back to, it only takes one component, and you can't build a car.
Yeah.
So it's a very tenuous situation, and certainly the big three in this case, they're not excited or want to even entertain supporting the supply base.
Right.
Oh, we'll float you a loan, or we'll give you receivables early, or those types of things. That, it's suck
but
it
for
up.
their own stability, it's a big issue.
Absolutely.
Right.
So we've got hundreds of suppliers, so we're looking at that as well, saying who might we have to bridge to get them through this, because we only have
Right.
one supplier.
For that particular part.
And we make safety components, so anything that is related to a safety component is extensive testing and approvals, so you can't just change suppliers.
Yeah, you can't go across the street and just build it.
We may have to do a crash test, and
Right.
it doesn't happen overnight. So there's some high risk in the food chain for sure.
So now you travel quite a bit. You mentioned...
We won't talk about how many miles, but I spend a fair bit of time in Mexico. That's where the bulk of our employees are in our facilities. Growing environment. Taking on a little different perspective in terms of the savings or the cost avoidance going south of the border. Wages have gone up significantly.
Yep.
We've had or experienced in our facilities 20% increase a year for the last 4 out of 5 years. Let's take COVID out.
2020.
Yeah, so it's compounding, and albeit I think everyone knows that it's not a significant wage to begin with. So we went from essentially $11 US a day to now they're at 15 US dollars per day. Not much money, but they have significant benefits.
Comparatively speaking to what they were years ago, it's a great number.
But it's with 5,000 employees there, the number adds up pretty quick.
Sure.
And as well, salary employees in Mexico now, their wages are not a whole lot different than in the U.S. To get talent. There's still some disparity at, call it entry-level salary positions, but in the senior ranks, it's very, very competitive with the U.S. So there isn't significant savings there. I think the biggest thing is risk of safety traveling there. Yeah. I do go to Reynosa, not the best place to go, but we have 5 facilities there. So there's a couple times a year I cross the border. Then we've also got the cost of real estate there. The cost of real estate is essentially 2x per square foot than it is in the U.S.
Is that right?
Yeah, it's a supply-demand issue, and there's a lot of Amazon-type companies there, including Amazon, that are doing distribution. So that floor space is at a premium.
Is it also speculators?
Oh, it's all developers. They're building, build it, they will come. Most of the buildings are leased before they're even built. So that's an unfavorable environment, but the workforce itself, hardworking people, very dedicated, high morals, if you will, in terms of the majority of the workforce is Catholic.
I was just going to say that, yeah.
And you'll see a number of Catholic rosaries and recognition of Virgin Mary on the walls in the buildings that we operate in. So it's unique. So the employees are very, very dedicated. Not to suggest we don't have that in the U.S., but it's a little different environment. But yes, I travel to Europe a bit. Been over 4 or 5 times this year already. Just bought a facility in Hungary, in Budapest, so I was over there for a period of time, and certainly go to Germany. We've got a lot of activity in Germany. So
now, would any of those facilities there make a product that comes back here?
There are.
Okay.
Yeah, brake line material comes from Europe to a certain degree. Fuel line material, we purchase some of that from Europe that we don't make here. Other componentry does come from Europe, not as much as previously. We did go through a fair bit of localization. We do bring in a fair bit of material from Korea. We're the brake and fuel supplier across the board for Hyundai Kia.
Okay.
So we have 100% of that business. Many of the componentry for that company comes from Korea.
Sure.
Previously had a big supply coming out of China, but with the tariffs and freight issues and the cost of a sea container, we've done a pretty good job of localizing that.
Okay.
But you can't remove some level of dependency on outside of the U.S.
How many facilities within the U.S. roughly?
For TI total? Yeah. So there's 19 what we call brake fuel thermal. That's thermal being AC and coolant, traditional engine, ice coolant, and refrigeration systems. And then we have 5 facilities that are associated with what we call fuel tank and delivery systems. It's fuel tanks, fuel modules, those types of things. So
now, how does a company like TI Automotive that's heavily involved in the ICE engine, internal combustion engine, how do they look to the future? Right,
fair
you have
question.
to bridge it, right?
Good question. So obviously we started the transition a couple of years ago,
Sure.
seeing this is coming on the horizon. Our products, our fuel line products, are one-for-one adaptable into the call it EV space for battery and electronics cooling.
Okay.
So that's been an easy transition. It's actually been a growth environment for us. Certainly the fuel tank side of the business is not big in North America, so the impact there, while somewhat troublesome, we're transitioning those facilities over to make what we call modules that,
Sure.
are pump and delivery system modules using our blow molding equipment. So there's been some redeployment there, but it's a tough environment. Our shareholders are asking about it all the time.
Sure.
You know, what happens with the
10,
fuel
5
tank
years,
side
10
of the
years
business?
down the road, right?
At one point, I can share this with you, at one point we were the 100% supplier of all fuel rails to Ford,
Okay.
high pressure and low pressure fuel rails, every engine. Obviously that's business is shrinking, and we've displaced that with some of the EV business and some other growth with other customers. So
Okay.
you have to be, it's head on a swivel.
Right.
It's a very dynamic environment. Certainly, I think the jury's still out on
Oh, yeah.
EVs in North America. Different environment in Europe. It's, they're going to stop making ICE engine platforms. China seems to be the major growth area. She said there's over 100
Right.
EV vehicle OEMs over there. They might be making 2 cars a month,
Sure.
but they're there. Not necessarily OEMs. Most of the OEMs have pulled out because of the competitive nature.
Right.
Stellantis pulled out, shut everything down. BMW, Mercedes looking at the same thing. Just can't compete. These vehicles are low cost.
Right.
So in terms of a Ford Lightning pickup
Right.
truck at
60,
90 to
yeah.
120 versus a vehicle in China that might be US dollars 15.
Right.
The Germans have struggled with building a vehicle
Correct.
that compromises quality and certainly their reputation. So there's some financial challenges there. Certainly it's a growth market for us, but at the same time it's challenging to make money.
Sure, sure.
Ultimately,
Yep.
it's great to have the growth, but you have to generate some bottom line numbers, and
Right.
it's tough. It's really
Yep.
tough.
Okay. Well, thanks for your time. One last question. So with all this travel, whether you're going to Brussels or you're going to Mexico or you're going somewhere else on the U.S. coasts, how do you put your schedule together to go see the San Diego Padres?
Well, at some point I knew. I see Jacob, the family, we all go out for opening day weekend in San Diego, so that's obviously back late March. It's tough to get out there.
Sure.
It's not expensive to get there. There's a direct flight from Detroit, so we all pile on, go out. It's significantly expensive to stay there.
Sure.
Jacob is not a big fan of having family members stay with him.
Right, right.
So that's always a topic of discussion.
Yeah.
But hotel rooms there and food is
$400 or
incredibly
$500 a night.
expensive. So setting the money side apart, because we do it
Yeah.
100 times over, we get out there, try to get there a couple times a year.
Yeah.
And then it's prudent to obviously see him when he's in Detroit.
Sure.
That was a great weekend. It was a good weekend for him. It was a good weekend for the family. We actually got to talk to him for more than 2 or 3 minutes on the
Right.
field after the game. And of course, when they play in Cleveland, I go down
Yeah.
there. Not this year, Cincinnati. So we try and get, and certainly Chicago's
spots, right.
Chicago's a prime spot. So I've seen a total of 7 games this year, which is a bit embarrassing. Didn't help that we had some plans to go out there this month and see some games before the season was over. As you know, they've not been playing well. And then on top of that, he got hurt. So
Sure.
inside pitch, broken right wrist. So just got his hard cast off a week ago,
Okay.
or this past Friday, I should say. It's got a splint on it. And of course, wants to get back at it,
Yeah.
and you know, so got to tone it down and be a little bit cautious.
Sure.
So yeah, it's good to see him. But you know, we go out for 4 days, and we might see him in total 60 minutes.
Yeah.
Right.
He's
So-
working. He's working.
He's working, and yeah, he doesn't come to TI,
Yeah.
thank God, and see Dad working. So it's
Right.
it's a different environment.
Yeah, it's just one of those things you deal. But I'm sure you've got the MLB package or something.
Oh yeah, yeah. You have to get that, and you can watch the games. You can watch
Right.
old games and today's games, and I think the whole family's sharing one password. So I probably shouldn't say that, but certainly it's something you have to have. And
Yeah. Okay. I think we covered everything. So thank you for coming in.
thanks for having me.
Thank you for all the knowledge of the automotive. I like talking about that too. And
Sure.
we'll look forward to seeing you on the streets soon. If anybody has an interesting gentleman like Mr. Croneworth, call the number on my cell phone, 586-707-5811. Until next time, we'll thank Charlie for being guest number 74. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Yep.